And we've got our note taker here also, don't we? Yeah. Okay. Recording has started. Great. So, a warm welcome and hello to our HPAC members and invitees to this bi-weekly session of the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. I'm your host today, Dennis Garrity, member of the HPAC Steering Circle and board chair of the Global Evergreening Alliance. Coming to you, by the way, from the Philippines, where it's a refreshing 5:30 a.m. in the morning. Now, in HPAC, we share a determination to advocate for a new global climate plan that recognizes that current global efforts to address climate change have not been succeeding. They are, in fact, failing to slow down the incessant upward path of global heating, which is not decelerating, it is rather accelerating, especially during the past 2 years. We recognize that the current global focus of this emissions reduction is absolutely crucial, but it isn't happening fast enough to forestall climate catastrophe for humanity and all of our precious ecosystems and the millions of species that inhabit Earth along with us. We believe that we must bring additional tools to bear to this runaway global heating freight train that will not only slow it down, but turn it around, and very soon. We must get serious now about not just stabilizing global temperatures, but reversing them before it's too late to avoid triggering many more Earth system tipping points that will prevent us from avoiding a hothouse Earth. Nowhere is the frightful seriousness of our plight more evident than in the Arctic, where temperatures are increasing at 4 times the rate than on the rest of the planet. This is where our young and intrepid colleagues at Operaatio Arktis come in. Their organization, based in Helsinki, is determined to mobilize awareness and action to save the Arctic. And they have the courage to declare that we need to look seriously at every possible solution to accomplish this. We have a special program in store for you today, featuring a conversation with Ms. Anni Pokela and Mr. Viktor Jaakkola of Operaatio. We've invited them to share the story of their organization and their future aspirations on how to save the Arctic. I would also confirm that we are aiming to have a great set of bi-weekly programs coming up through the end of this year and on into 2025 on many more critical topics related to the HPAC mission. So stay tuned for them as well. Now, let's dive in with brief remarks from each of our 2 guests, followed by an open Q&A. And while you're listening, kindly write your queries to our speakers in the chat box as well. Anni, you have given a brilliant presentation last year that deeply inspired me and countless others who witnessed your YouTube video that asked the stark question, so what's the plan? And then you elegantly answered that question by accurately stating, well, there is no plan. Thank you, Anni, for joining us today, and please start us off by sharing your reflections on how Operaatio got started and came to be such a highly respected youth organization dedicated to awareness building and mobilization for action to save the Arctic. The floor is yours, Anni.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much for having us. It's lovely to be here. Not as refreshing, 12:30 in the nighttime here in Helsinki, but feeling very, very energetic to talk to you all. Very nice to meet you all. I'm Anni. I'm 23 years old, and I've been working now with Operaatio Arktis for 2 years. We call ourselves a climate strategy agency. by organizing civil disobedience campaigns in Extinction Rebellion, Finland, where our focus was definitely on emission cuts and systemic change, things that are still very, of course, very dear to us. So we were doing this activism, so like shutting down streets in Helsinki, etc., because we wanted a safe climate for everyone. That was our like ultimate goal, a safe climate. And a bit over 2 years ago now, we realized that talking about just emission cuts wasn't actually in line with that goal. So we probably wouldn't have a safe climate even if all emissions cease tomorrow. And this became even clearer when we learned about tipping points, especially in the Arctic. So yeah, we were horrified, of course, especially as young people, but we weren't quite ready to accept all of this potential damage. So we started looking into additional measures that could potentially still safeguard these Earth systems that we depend on. So yeah, our whole idea of climate change actually of what climate change actually is and how we should deal with it was transformed through kind of taking a step back and reevaluating climate science and really reading into that climate science. We kind of moved away from this traditional, pretty, I guess, simplistic way of looking at climate change and a view of climate change as I think it's still widely understood, which is that climate change is this problem of gradual warming that we can solve by gradual emission mitigation. Well, because when we learned more about climate science, we started to look at climate change as more of a complex set of different risks, of tipping points, of non-linear change. And that kind of view of climate change forces us to think about novel solutions or more like complex combinations or cocktails of different solutions. So yeah, we think that policies and our climate strategies should reflect this complexity and interconnectedness of our Earth system elements, and that really requires a more holistic approach to climate change, a new paradigm, if you will, where we don't only mitigate, adapt, and so on, but also try to find ways to actively intervene in these collapses that are already underway. So yeah, we started talking about climate repair as this new paradigm, as not only a new and updated set of solutions to combat this multifaceted crisis, but also as an approach where we sort of dare to look at specific ecosystems, evaluate what specific parts of the climate system are breaking down and need saving, and dare to take the risk of trying to still save them. So yeah, our ultimate goal is, of course, to preserve the polar ice caps and prevent global tipping points, not to see geoengineering happen. Those two are starting to look like they might be really, connected to each other, of course, but the realization of these near-term climate risks that's what originally brought us to talk about climate interventions or geoengineering 2 years ago. And that's still a really important point to bring up in our work. Like I don't think any of us are particularly excited about the fact that this crisis has gotten to this point. I don't think any of us are particularly excited about these techniques. There are a lot of unknowns and risks involved with these techniques that we need to evaluate. And yeah, we take those risks very seriously. We just think that those risks need to be compared to the risks of not trying to intervene in any way. So yeah, in that speech that some of you might have seen already, I asked the question, what's the plan? As you said, Dennis, and yeah, I asked that question to get people thinking about the two options that we basically have right now, to either accept these collapses or take the risk of trying to find ways to intervene in them. And in our work, we've noticed that maybe the first step that we need to take in order for people to really face those two options is to update society's knowledge on the climate situation. So, you know, how else are they going to even consider these frankly like bonkers ideas? There's no country as of yet has the prevention of tipping points as part of their climate strategies. And yeah, Viktor will tell more about our plans to change that in a bit. But yeah, lastly, just to wrap this thing up, going back to my earlier point about this kind of holistic approach to climate action and climate interventions, I feel like there's something quite passive in the idea of sort of standing back and only mitigating and cutting emissions within our societies, while all of these hugely important parts of our Earth are already collapsing and reaching their tipping points. And as our wonderful colleague Lena once said, climate repair or climate interventions for us are not just a way to repair these ecosystems that need our help, because they maybe can also be a way in which we can repair our, frankly, like indifferent relationship to these parts of the earth that we depend on and ultimately, you know, are a part of. So yeah, we're asking people to dare to care about these systems and to you know, take the risk of trying to find ways to still salvage them. Yeah, that's all. I think that's all I have for you now, and I'll hand it over to Viktor if Viktor is gonna go next.
Okay, Dennis, you're muted if you want to say some words in between.
Oh, I was just thanking Anni for that great introduction to the work of Operaatio, and was going to pass the torch to you, Viktor, for some of your views on the strategy and plans of Operaatio for the coming year and beyond. So
okay, thank you. Thanks, Dennis, and thank you, Anni, for telling about where we're from and how our thinking has evolved and how we feel about the situation. I also want to give a special shout out to Jonathan Cole for having a really cool picture of Operaatio Arktis. It's nice. Okay, so we have done some things in the past. We have written a publication. We have organized a conference. We have tried to network as broadly as possible with different actors in this climate intervention scene, you could say. And we have met with policymakers, scientists, and others. And now it's time for us to actually try to get some things moving, get things done, and I'm now going to present to you what our strategy is for this in short. Now, this is a kind of early stage still of this strategy, and we are always learning and adapting to the world, and we are also very open to feedback and different ideas that you come up with. Okay, that said, our ideas for going forward began to take shape earlier this year when a consortium in Finland, a flagship project called the ACCC, which is an acronym for the Atmosphere and Climate Competence Center, came out with a policy briefing to the Finnish government. This consortium consists of 3 major universities in Finland and the Finnish Meteorological Institute, and they have a quite good position in Finland, and they are regularly coming out with policy briefings to the Finnish government. Now, this year, they came out with a policy briefing on the need for tipping point governance, with a special focus on the potential collapse of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which is a really timely topic for Finland. especially because the changes would be very drastic here if the AMAC actually collapsed this century. And because these policy briefings often go unnoticed or aren't enforced into policy, we figured maybe this is an opportunity for us to find some synergies, because we have been communicating about tipping points since our very beginning. And so we thought, okay, let's take it as a goal to try to get tipping point governance into the climate strategy of the Finnish government. And what is tipping point governance, first of all? It can be divided into 4 main categories. One is to detect tipping points in the climate system. The second is to forecast them or monitor them. So at what point will these systems tip? What will the consequences be? And what kind of different scenarios are there? Then there is the third category of tipping point governance, which is the one of prevention, which is the one that we are interested in, of course. And this is where climate interventions come in. And then there is the fourth category, which is sort of preparing for a possible world where we have exceeded these tipping points and what it means for our societies, economies, agriculture, so on. And so we're thinking, okay, there has come out this policy brief from these prominent Finnish climate scientists. Now we actually have some people that we can take with us, perhaps, when we try to lobby or influence the state. So this is in really short what we're doing. We're going to try to, or we are setting up a working group with some policymakers, some scientists in Finland, and then we're going to try to get a lot of visibility in media, on TV, writing to newspapers, and then also together try to get this tipping point governance into the Finnish climate strategy. And of course, Finland is a small country. The world is a big place. But if one country takes leadership on this topic, that is very crucial, then perhaps other countries could follow suit. And this way, this could become an international phenomenon. Simultaneously, we are doing some work on a more European level, you could say. I'm going to, with my colleague Justus Lehtisaari, which some of you may have talked with, I'm going to be trying to meet with some members of European Parliament from the Nordic countries one-on-one in the coming months, and then try to set up a roundtable discussion meeting in Brussels sometime in October. This will be in the tailwind of a new report that is coming out of the European Union Commission, more specifically from the group of chief scientific advisors. So they are publishing a report on SRM. It's kind of a landmark thing for the European Union. A similar report hasn't really come out before. So we're gonna sort of use that to make the point that this is a timely topic that we should be aware about, and hopefully we can get people to agree that, get these members of European Parliament to agree that research funding should be allocated properly to climate interventions. We are thinking of trying to influence the Horizon Europe Research Fund, which will have Arctic research focus in the year 2027. Okay, I can tell you a couple other things that are going on. We're trying to continue or actually, well, initiate or strengthen our discussions with the Sami indigenous people in Samiland. We're gonna be translating some literature of tipping points into their native tongues and facilitate and support their discussions on the topic, and also at a later point bring up climate intervention into the discussion. Do I still have some time, or is that okay?
So I think, please, if you have a few more observations, go right ahead.
Okay.
This is interesting.
Yeah. And furthermore, we are also going to be having some type of presence on the international arena. The New York Climate Week is coming up next month. We will have 3 of our members there. I heard Ellen is going to be in a panel discussion with James Hansen and Johan Rockström, which I am a little bit jealous about. And then I will be going to the Arctic Circle Assembly with my colleague Justus in October. And then we will also have Liina, Justus, and Ellen going to the COP29 conference, which I believe we will talk more about today.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Viktor. And perhaps before we open up the floor for discussion, I wonder if either you or Anni would like to say a few words about how perhaps the Healthy Planet Action Coalition could engage with you in support of your activities and collaborating, doing joint events and other kinds of work together. Are there any observations you may have on that opportunity?
Do you want to go first, Anni, or should I?
Yeah, you go ahead. I think you have better touch with our kind of international work that we do right now, I think.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. I would absolutely well, any proposal that you have about how we could work together, we would be very happy to hear about. Of course, when there are these international conferences and whatnot, we are happy to, whenever we're there, participate. And also, if you have some type of virtual meetings, or you want us as a part in some meetings with people, we're happy to join. Also, some type of open letters that you may be drafting. Maybe this could be something to work on. I haven't actually given this that much thought. I was kind of hoping that you would come with some proposals. Yeah.
Well, excellent. I think we will, in fact, and maybe some of our our participants today will have some suggestions to share with you. And I wouldn't be surprised if Herb Simmons might comment, because he'll be attending the New York Climate Week, and I'm sure has already made a note to make sure to see you and your fellow colleagues there. There he is. But that's great, and I think this is a terrific introduction to our conversation today. So let's open up the floor for audience participation with brief, to the point comments or questions. And I will look for the hands raised and try to bring them into the discussion in order of their raising their hands. And I see first to go ahead with us is Mike McCracken, our eminent climate scientist. Mike?
Well, thank you. And that was a very interesting presentation. So I guess what I'm curious about is what sort of pushback you might be getting. So, for example, Greta Thunberg has been not very favorable or opposed to the notion of trying to intervene in some way, sort of calling for continuing action. I guess I'm wondering if you're getting sort of pushback in various ways and what your thoughts are about how to respond to that pushback to, sort of get a sense that the increasing desperation of the situation merits some reconsideration of things.
Sure,
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks. Yeah, I can just go ahead, Viktor, and fill me in. No, that's just something that I'm personally very interested in. I've had a lot of those conversations with people. I've spoken to people who are part of this project called non-use agreement on solar geoengineering, who want an absolute moratorium on I believe even on research concerning solar radiation management. And of course, it saddens me to be on a different side with Greta Thunberg, who I admire greatly, who I was also on the streets with XR Finland a couple months back. We were in the same protest, which was really cool. Yeah, I think what I usually tell people is that, for me at least, it seems really difficult, or it seems a bit weird to be, especially like a Western person, like white person living in the global North, selling, people that we shouldn't research geoengineering. There are people who have already lost their homes. There are lands that are currently underwater because of sea level rise. And there are a lot of adverse effects, a lot of climate impacts that are only getting worse. And while they get worse, people get more interested in geoengineering. So even if you're not for geoengineering, I wouldn't say I am for geoengineering. I just think there's a growing need for research and maybe even implementation at some point if we find a good technique. Even if you're not for those techniques, I think you should be part of the discussion because it's not going anywhere. Like the conversation about geoengineering is not going anywhere. And when I talk to these people, I just mainly I want to tell them, we appreciate your input. We appreciate your views on this subject. Please don't try to ban this conversation, but be part of it. So that would be one way of maybe that I want to approach the situations. Yeah, and maybe remind these people about the climate reality that we are in right now, and maybe about the fact that, researching these techniques aren't necessarily an option, a option number 2 or a plan B. They can be integrated with emission cuts and systemic change. Yeah.
Thank you on that, Anni. I remember your comment earlier to me that it seems that people in the global South are more on the optimistic end of the spectrum regarding sunlight reflection methods. And indeed, I've seen that here in the Philippines, where I've spoken to hundreds of people about sunlight reflection methods. I have yet to come across a single person who has expressed reservations about the relative risks of SRM vis-a-vis not deploying or not doing anything. And that may be due to the fact that in countries like the Philippines, very vulnerable to climate change, everyone wakes up every morning worried about the next super typhoon, the next massive flood that affects millions of people in this country. So it's very interesting how the perspectives differ. Right. Well, let's see. Let's look at our next. I believe Brian was next in line. Looks like you're out for a morning walk, Brian.
Yeah, it's great. The hinterlands of the Sunshine Coast of Queensland, Australia, Jeannie-Barra territory, and Anni and Viktor, it's great to hear your words on this topic. Very important. I do want to offer one bit of hope on the research side, and that is that our local and regional efforts that are done with communities are by definition not geoengineering because they are not global and they're not large scale. And that presents an opportunity to move forward with boots on the ground and fins in the water before there's a consensus or even consent with respect to any geoengineering or geoengineering research. And thus, I would encourage the notion of community-led and coordinated projects that are transparent and that try to address climate adaptation at a local and regional scale. Just one bit of experience that we've had from the Philippines to India, where this seems to be working well. And I think it'd be very interesting to connect with some First Nation groups, as we are in the United States, to try to address these issues tactically, locally, and regionally. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the technology coming out of Cambridge University might be relevant for the Arctic. So happy to brainstorm that a bit further with you. And secondly, I'd love to learn more about Operaatio membership and outreach. Do you have members? I know you have a number of active personnel, but are you collecting membership as well? And how do you reach out to different groups, and how would you characterize the demographics of the groups that or the people that you've connected with through your organization? Thank you.
Right.
Okay, thank you for these greetings, Brian. We are not really collecting members at the moment. We are a group consisting of 10 or so people, some working full-time, some working part-time, and we are now all based in Helsinki. I would characterize our network as quite diverse. It's essentially, well, in Finland, we know a lot of people from the scene. Essentially, most people who have anything to do with climate have heard of us, I'd say. And internationally speaking, it's we've tried to reach out to most people working on climate interventions. And we should probably do a little bit of a better work with reaching out to international environmental organizations. This is something we actually will be doing in Europe this autumn together with another organization. To answer to Michael McCracken a little bit regarding the opposition to geoengineering, we have tried to reach out to the most vocal organizations, but they are not really willing to discuss with us about this. I think that has been the strategy that they have opted to take, which is unfortunate. We would actually be very happy to discuss this topic with them. And we're not really afraid of backlash, and that's inevitable anyways. So
Viktor, do you find yourself getting traction with particular demographics or audiences, young people, different countries? And what have you given thought previously to actually, building up a newsletter list or a membership of some kind to actually draw, let's say, popular support over time? I'm just curious what your journey has been so far in outreach to the population.
Right. We do have a newsletter that you can subscribe to.
Okay.
Anni, do you have something to say about the different demographics and what kind of demographics?
Yeah. Sure. I'm just writing out our website on the chat so everyone can check that out, and you can subscribe to our newsletter there. Yeah, and funny that you mentioned Cambridge University. We have been in very close contact with them, the Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge. One of the first people that we talked to about this whole thing when we first started this project was Sean Fitzgerald and Hugh Hunt from Cambridge, and we are actually currently, I'm part of their advisory board, which is very, very cool. Looks very nice on my CV as a 23-year-old. Don't know how I ended up there. Yeah, we started out kind of dividing our kind of desired demographic to two groups. One was like relevant organizations and politicians and stuff, especially in Finland, because we know Finland. Finland is a small country. It's easy to, just go to talk to people. Like you can just meet people on the street and go talk to them. Like it's a lot easier when, the government isn't like super far away from normal life. And the kind of other part is young people. So because we've been so busy with lobbying recently and with talking to, I guess, older people, sometimes we forget about the young people. But then again, we are young people, and I think in Helsinki, where we're based, we have been able to get a lot of young people involved, and I guess interested in this whole thing, and a lot of people who were, I guess pretty suspicious at first, like what were we doing? Why did we, leave XR to do this thing? But a lot of people have kind of turned around, I guess, with this subject, and I think that's got to do with the fact that we are young and we, that is kind of our specialty, to talk to our own age group, I guess, and to kind of to word those anxieties that we feel as young people. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Just as a postscript, I think there could be an opportunity for us to cross-fertilize each other's readership, our two organizations, a chance to make it multi-generational and also a chance to make it global. And that would be very interesting to explore as we go forward, because we do spend a fair amount of time and have hundreds of followers here. But I think there's a good chance to really make it international and multi-generational going forward. So thank you.
Sounds great, Brian. Thank you. Let's move on to Robert.
Thank you very much. I thought your presentation just had extraordinary clarity and vision, and remarkably important for the future of our planet. So really well done on everything that you're doing. My concern also relates to the matters raised by Mike, that this discussion is really confined to small groups, and it really should be in the mass media. There should be op-eds in major newspapers which are advocating for higher albedo. It should people like yourselves should be on television debating with opponents. Like this idea that the opponents can control the conversation and shut down the debate is morally appalling. And so I'd be interested in your efforts to engage the broader public, also the political process. I would love to see, for example, Finland and Switzerland, maybe Australia, come together to advocate for just international governance of geoengineering. And so how are you going with all of those sorts of things? Thanks.
Yeah, I think I can start with just saying that Viktor can, fill me in, but one of our biggest things is that what we do in practice is basically science communication. So I think this whole conversation around geoengineering is very scientific, very hard to follow. Like I struggle with reading these articles that has to do with the work that I do. Like even even the people that I know that read climate science and like more in their lives struggle sometimes to understand these things. I think it's really important to bring these things to kind of a context of, I don't know, like if you're an art student, bring this conversation to, you know, into a language that's, you know, that they can use, that they can understand. So I think one of the biggest things is we try to talk to people in very different areas of society and give them capacity. I think that's the biggest thing that we've been doing during the last few years is building capacity for people to partake in the discussion. And that means that, you know, people like me who I've not studied climate science at all, I've studied gender studies mostly in my life, that, you know, people like me have the capacity to take part in the discussion themselves and kind of have ownership of the discussion, because like even if you don't know anything about climate science, you live on the earth, so you should be able to partake. Viktor, do you have anything to add?
Very good,
Yeah.
Anni. Oh, Viktor, did you have a point?
Yeah, I could continue a little bit. I think we have to be confrontative to the status quo of climate policy, but still in like a respectful manner. We have to call out bad science, essentially. We're still getting a bit of backlash because we're saying that the 1.5C target is essentially dead without climate interventions, which is a bit absurd, but we just have to stay strong and continue to communicate the actual situation that we are in. I would also encourage everyone in this climate intervention scene to be very mindful of the systematic changes that are needed in order for society to decarbonize, because this is one of the biggest obstacles for people to endorse our ideas and vision, because we may be giving too little attention to the systematic changes that the rest of the environmental movement is trying to bring forward. And this is seen as a dangerous distraction from it, as they are putting it. Nonetheless, we need a broad range of different approaches.
Absolutely, Viktor. Yeah, we face the same challenges. And with regard to communications, I would just repeat what I mentioned in the announcement, the wonderful publication that Operaatio has published and is available on the website called Arctic Endgame, a very deep analysis of options and the science and the policy mechanisms to deal with the Arctic crisis. So that's that if you go back to the email, you can see that and have a look at that. Great. Well, let me move on to Jonathan Cole.
Dennis, excuse me, my hand went down, and in the interest of gender diversity and also that I had my hand up, I don't know why it went down. Would I be allowed to speak next, please?
Oh, yes. I that's why I didn't. Yeah, your hand must have.
It did go down. I don't know why I didn't do anything, but.
Okay. Well, go right ahead, Rebecca, and then we'll go to Jonathan.
Thank you, Dennis. Viktor and Anni, thank you so much. My middle degree is in women's studies, Anni, and it's a very good political degree. And my first and my third degrees are economics and resource management. I'm from Morang in Sydney, Australia, and greetings from the land of the Gadigal people, which is where I am right now in a little town called Leichhardt. I'd just like to share in rebrighton.org, we're continuing the legacy of Professor Stephen Salter, trying to get marine cloud rebrightening up and running. We're part of efforts to have an end-to-end solution on the technical side, because as Stephen used to say, if we don't have a climate cooling or a sunlight reflection method actually ready to go, then it's all talk. And so just letting you know that we have in our group a number of scientists and practical people like John McDonald, Brian, of course, and other scientific people. We think he might even be going to become our chief scientific advisor, Professor Alan Gadian. And Alan is leading international efforts on the debates about what happens if you have regional marine cloud rebrightening, what happens to the other parts of the Earth. And I won't even go into here what his results say, or the results of several different modelers, just to say that's one of the key questions that people have about marine cloud rebrightening as a method of cooling the Earth. I can see that Dr. Das has his hand up, Sumitra, and he's also one of our colleagues, so I'm sure he'll have something lovely to share when he comes to that. And apart from those things that I wanted to let you know about rebrighten, my offer and my commitment is that I'd love to organise a couple of online webinars here in Warang. My daughter is 25 and she has other science. She herself is a political scientist, and her degree was in Hungarian studies. She's fluent in Hungarian, and she won the university medal in that topic. And she's now working in the Department of Education like myself. But anyway, she has a lot of scientific friends. And so I would love to work with you to have any kind of, you have the agenda and some sort of reasonable hour of the day for you. I don't know what time, but that's just an invitation, and I'll be in touch with you about it. And also I have read your website extensively, and I'm, thrilled. We have a saying in English, thrilled to bits, and I am thrilled to bits about your work. So I don't really have a comment. It's more of a saying that I'll be in touch with you to organise a webinar like that. But any comments are welcome, of course. I just wanted to share.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And now we'll go back to Jonathan Cole.
Annie, it doesn't take more than a few months of studying the climate chaos to come to the conclusion that we have to refreeze the Arctic. It might be step 1 or step 2 or step 3, but it's right in there with the first few steps to rebalance the energies of Earth. So if we refreeze the Arctic, I'm sure it's occurred to you that we have to push the temperatures of those countries near the Arctic much lower than they are in order to overcome the energy imbalance and to refreeze that entire zone. Have you given much thought to whether the citizens of those countries will be willing to make that sacrifice so that the overall global rebalancing can occur? They might have to have, for instance, winters for a while that are 10 degrees Celsius colder than they are currently. Do you think that's something that they would accept for the good of the rest of us?
Very interesting question. That's not something that I'm familiar with as a necessary side effect of refreezing the Arctic. What I would say is that something that I lose my sleep over is the very possible collapse of AMOC during my lifetime, which would lower the temperatures of even 10, 15, 20 degrees in some of the northern parts of Europe. That would mean the end of agriculture, for example, in Finland, or like in Northern Europe in general. I think people are more frightened of that. I don't know, Viktor, if you have no more information on the climate science part of that. Like, is that something that you have come across or thought about?
Well, looking ahead maybe 10 years into the future, when we're much better at the science and we've done a lot of experiments, it's theoretically possible that we can do things to the atmosphere that cause clouds to disappear from certain areas. They would turn to ice and they would snow out, or they would rain out. And it would create a better nighttime emission of energy from the surface of the water or the land, so that during the long winter, the polar regions could give off a lot more energy to space and help with the rebalancing, instead of having these cloud covers that sort of keep the ground and the ocean warm during the winter. So it might be that we develop an easy way to get rid of that, but then it would make the winters much colder because the energy would not be trapped by the clouds. And we might have people that are affected by that to allow it, so that those people down at the equator who are suffering from the heat would start to feel a rebalancing of the overall planet.
Right, Jonathan. I think that this technical issue is something that you might want to go offline with Victor and Anni to discuss further, so we could move on. We have so many people wanting to get engaged. Our
I could
next.
answer quickly, if that's fine.
Oh, you want to go ahead, Victor? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, sometimes in times of crisis, I know that shared sacrifice can be something that is possible. For example, during wars, there can be rationing where everyone is kind of tightening their belts and coming together for a common goal. But I don't think that the peoples of the Arctic are going to accept this if they see it as a way of them losing something, in a sense. If it's a way for the Arctic region to maintain their ways of life and the stability of the region, then I think that perhaps there can be acceptance for climate interventions. Yeah.
Thank you, Victor. Now let's move on to Herb and then Ron.
All right, thank you. And it's really exciting to see both you, Victor and Anni. Victor, we had a conversation with Dennis a couple months ago, and I was looking forward to today. I have a couple quick comments and then a question. First, I had the opportunity to spend time in Brussels in late June, I guess it was, and I had a chance to meet your colleague, your sort of Belgian rep, whose name I can't remember, but I had a wonderful couple of conversations with him. And if I remember, he was just finishing his master's degree or so, and I hope is he still involved? And I guess one quick question is, do you have folks in other countries that are sort of functioning like which I understand he does, as kind of representatives of yours or colleagues of yours?
Yeah, so Justus Lehtisaari is his name, and he has been functioning as our Brussels correspondent because he has been studying there, world politics, and he is moving to Finland now.
Okay.
Actually moved already, so he will be working with us here in Helsinki for the conceivable future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I wanted to mention. Sorry, go ahead.
And no, we don't have members from other countries right now.
Okay.
I wanted to mention that I will be in New York for Climate Week, so I hope to have a chance to sit down and other than virtually with whoever you all are going to be there. We hope to be able to do an online seminar, webinar, which we're waiting to hear if we're accepted. But it would be great to see you there. And one of the things I had been thinking about and talked to Dennis about in the past, and it's certainly not today is not the time to go into it in detail. But in watching your videos and reading your materials, our missions and our philosophy are very much in sync. There may be some subtle differences in emphasis, and obviously, our age is probably slightly older than your age, but nonetheless. So my thought is that whether we should, I would like to, I guess, to put it more positively, I would like to explore with you all whether we can develop a partnership agreement, something where we, formally but not too formally, basically identify the areas where we can work together, sharing information, hosting events, whatever it may be, and as a way to further our reach and further your reach. So I would just sort of put that out there, and if the two of you are interested in that, I'd be happy to, along with anybody else on HPAC, to explore that privately and see where we go. But the main question I had is, HPAC, we're not about developing a climate restoration plan. What we're about is urging the world community to do it, and do it damn quickly and comprehensively, objectively, and equitably. And that's what our focus is. And I came across a year ago, and I think most of my colleagues here have as well, this effort in the Arctic that's called Frozen Arctic Saving the Frozen Arctic that was led by John Moore with 61 techniques to slow, stop, or reverse climate change or sea ice loss in the Arctic or so. And I was very impressed with that, both as an approach to saving the Arctic, but maybe as a model for the whole world or for other parts of the world. And I understand this is just the first phase. So my question to the two of you is, how involved are you in this effort? Do you see this as a way to begin to operationalize and do the kind of systematic research that involves, from what I can see in reading the document, there was a lot of outreach to groups and so forth. So I'm really curious your perspective on that approach and that document and what might come out of it.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's we really love that document as well. And we're really happy to hear about that. We are very good friends with John Moore and have been collaborating with Arctic in the past as well. Yeah, Viktor, do you have some ideas about where that paper could lead us?
Yeah, credit where credit is due. Albert von Feengarden, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, was the main author of that paper. And yeah, it's a really good document. It was also taken by the Sami Council for them to evaluate. So they are in the midst of a process of going through the different interventions and sort of giving their opinion on the different interventions. So it's already leading somewhere, and it's a good example for the rest of the world too. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
On Herb's question about the possibility of developing a type of agreement, kind of like a memorandum of agreement between our organizations, does that something that might ring a bell with you?
Yeah, it could ring a bell. Absolutely. We could probably discuss this at some later date as well. One thing that I have to point out is that your mailing list is very active, which means that you can't really direct it to your own email unless you want it to get flooded. So then perhaps we should set up like a different kind of partnership type of email list, which would have be less active. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I think we know exactly where you're coming from. In fact, just over the past few days, we've had an enormous amount of email traffic about Arctic solutions in the HPAC membership. It's been a very dynamic conversation on the Arctic just recently. And I'll follow up with you, Viktor and Anni, about this idea of a kind of memorandum of agreement that would help guide our joint efforts together. Okay, well, thank you, Herb. On to Ron Bayman. Ron?
Yes, thank you. I had to unmute myself.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Anni and Viktor. This is, I remember the first time you guys came on, or at least anyway, with Hugh after the COP28 on a debrief on that. But it's just really encouraging and wonderful to see the work that you're doing. Because of course, as Mike has sort of suggested with his remark, and it's I'm sure it's absolutely critical that the young people, and especially, become more aware of the issues that you're raising and the problems with the current strategy. I did want to just make, and of course, the notion of the collaboration with HPAC would be wonderful, and we I'm sure Dennis will get back to you, and the steering circle will certainly move on with that, or try to move forward with that if we can. I did want to raise a couple of questions that came up earlier, and I'm just wondering if how your thinking has evolved. Particularly, so in the I sent out, I've been sending out these links on the chat, and one of them has to do with a little excerpt from the HPAC cooling paper on coordination and governance. In that paper, in that little excerpt, there are some references for how one might go about possibilities for going about implementing direct climate cooling, including what Brian was talking about, at the local level, trying to do whatever we can to improve the situation for local communities, but as part of that, an effort to perhaps start with an Arctic and Antarctic. And let me just emphasize that if you actually cool the Arctic, you want to cool the Antarctic as well, because otherwise you get some bad results. And I think I mentioned that before, and you're probably aware of that, as Victor points out. So, but and that's if you actually get some significant cooling. So initially, the idea in the paper that's floated is to do some pilot efforts, and this could be. I mean, we're talking about. The stratospheric aerosol injection or marine, or some of the things you talked about as well could be part of that mix, which would be cirrus cloud thinning or to do something about in the wintertime as well. But a pilot effort that would be framed as a kind of save the Arctic effort, in the same way that the Great Barrier Reef MCB effort has been framed, save the Great Barrier Reef. And apparently that has worked as a political framing, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of opposition to trying to save the Great Barrier Reef, shave off the extreme heat events that are destroying the coral reef. And similarly, I was wondering, you of course are very well placed, being up in the Nordic countries, to work with the other groups that have indigenous communities in the Arctic, and also jurisdiction over the Arctic. Frankly, includes Canada, the U.S. Alaska to some extent, but to just see if there's some way to engage the local communities, on a kind of a pilot effort that could then be a way to generate trust and confidence. So in the one of the proposals in that little excerpt I sent out was the International Space Station effort, where just countries that have the ability, have the interest, get together to do a kind of an international, work on an international pilot program with full transparency, everything open, and build the trust and confidence of the world in that kind of an effort through this kind of what starts out as a regional local strategy, but is really geared toward doing some pilot programs. I know the ScopeX program and whatnot, but my understanding is that was not. We've had some recent reports on that from David Keith. Actually points out that you may have read that response that he sent out, that it wasn't really the SAMI Council, it was some individuals or whatever. I don't, but anyway, so I'm just floating these ideas as possibilities, because I think if just a few countries, and we've talked about the small island states, possibly other, countries that are severely impacted, and you, of course, with the polar amplification is a huge effect for people in Finland, especially the indigenous folks in Finland. And so, if just a few countries could start really promoting these ideas and making these kind of efforts, it could have a major impact on the global conversation and openness to these ideas as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, Victor?
Absolutely. Yeah, I like your vision, and especially your comparison to the International Space Station. I would like to see this kind of climate intervention as a collective international effort to save what is dear to us and we need for our survival. So yeah, I share those thoughts, and maybe if we succeed with changing the climate strategy of Finland, something like this could start to shape up. I would also, at this point, when I still remember, and I probably should have begun with this, give credit to our head of strategy, Anton Keskinen, who has been very, very central in shaping our strategy going forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And next up is Peter Gubbles. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Viktor and Anni, thank you for sharing about your research. And of course, I share, as I'm sure all of us do, the deep concerns about the tipping points, the AMOC, rise in sea level, all of that. And we certainly need to learn more about how to cope with that. But having said that, I'd like to come back to two things you've mentioned in your talk. One, Anni, you mentioned a more holistic approach. And Viktor, you mentioned very briefly, I didn't know quite how to interpret it, the work of Johan Rockström and the planetary boundaries concept and the 9 boundaries. You know that Johan has, in their research, have indicated that, well, it leads to the concept of overshoot, and that if everyone consumed and wasted as much as Europeans do, we would need 7 planet Earths. That's the the concept of overshoot. And my question is this: to what extent are you familiar with the wider sets of discussions and analyses relating to not just climate change, which is only one of the 9 boundaries, but the wider ecological and other initiatives going on to deal with that? And not only to what extent are you familiar, but to what extent are you comfortable embedding that or blending that with your scientific research, at least in Finland, to talk, do you find it's relevant, or do you find that it's distracting if you also refer to these wider issues that certainly have an impact on or relate to your research? I'm not a scientist, so I can't say much about the research you're doing. It's just that, on a small scale, of course, it seems relevant and important. But should we not embed that in this wider concept that I just referred to, overshoot and the planetary boundaries? That's my question.
Very good. Very good. Viktor, Anni, who might like to address that? I think, Viktor, you mentioned Johan Rockström a little earlier, so you obviously know his work very much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your question. First, I want to point out that we're not researchers. We're more like climate activists, I guess, something of the sort. And secondly, one of my favorite books of all time is William J. Catton's Overshoot from 1981, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have studied environmental economics at the university until I figured that I must do something more productive. And I subscribe to ideas of ecological economics as well. I'd say I'm quite acquainted with these topics. It can get a bit confusing if we start communicating these realities simultaneously as we're trying to focus on tipping points and climate interventions. But as I said earlier, we need to make it very clear also that climate change is not the only issue going on, and that we agree with the sort of more, how would you say, systematic changes that are needed in order for humanity to thrive. Yeah, Anni.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree, and I completely subscribe to those ideas as well. What I think what we're trying to do is not to talk about everything, but to give people who work with different parts of, societal or ecological crisis or, challenges, to give them tools to kind of integrate the idea of climate repair into their own work. So we don't have to do everything, but we can give the tools to other people to kind of learn about this specific topic, and to make them understand how to fit this kind of puzzle piece into their, their analysis of, the situation with the climate, or what they need to do, and, what are the different parts of the world, and different problems that we need to address.
Makes great sense, Anni. Let's now go back for another round. I see we have Robert and then Rebecca.
I'd like to push back slightly on a comment that Anni made about whether solar radiation management will be necessary. And my sense is that with our planet with 8 billion people just groaning under so many strains, that global management of weather is something that is just absolutely necessary. And when I look at the benefits of that global management in terms of sea level rise, in terms of biodiversity protection in the midst of the sixth extinction, in terms of the systemic disruptions of the risk of tipping points, I don't see any room for the view that, oh, maybe we can have a future without sunlight reflection. It's something that I think, I often see this framing in the media. None of the scientists who are researching it actually want to see it happen, and I just think that that's a recipe for it not happening. It's only if people say this is a good thing, this is something that is necessary, it's a move forward, it's a paradigm shift, as Anni put it, that it's we're moving into a global thinking where we're all on this planet together, and we need to cooperate and govern the planet. Otherwise, the risks are just so immense. So welcome any responses on that.
Yeah, sure, thank you. And I completely agree. It wasn't really my intention to argue that we don't need SRM. I don't know how I framed it or how I worded that, but I think where my kind of the way that I talk about SRM, where this language and kind of this this framing comes from, is the fact that I feel like we still don't have the information necessary to just like go ahead and do it, and or like just spray it in the air. We have a lot of work to do still, and when we talk about SRM to people who haven't heard about it, who are new to the subject, they might be really scared if we just go out and say this has to be done or we're all gonna die. I might think that, like, I have a lot to lose, I feel like, if we don't ever have the ability to use SRM. Like, I'm really, frightened about that future and what that would look like if we can't do it. But yeah, that is still something that we, there are a lot of questions when it comes to like the language that we use and the way we communicate about these things. Is sometimes it's easier to have these discussions going in like, okay, so if we need geoengineering, we should have all the information that we can have about these techniques if we ever need them. But like, that might be a better way to like approach someone on this subject, but that's not exactly what we think. Because we do already think that we need them. There's just a lot of questions, a lot of risks that we need to discuss. Yeah. But thank you for bringing that up.
The diplomacy of communications on SRM, very, very, very challenging.
And so what it illustrates with the governance agenda is that it just needs to be so totally scientific. And, it means recognizing what's our current state of knowledge, what's the importance of field research, how can we develop a gradual incremental strategy that starts from where we are now and puts safety and acceptance at the center and brings people along with the conversation.
I suppose one of the issues is that the world isn't a particularly just place. There is still neo-colonialism going on, and the fossil fuel industry is strong, which means that these kinds of ideas are often viewed as some kind of continuation to a unjust system, which might take a little time to change. Yeah.
One of the serious impediments, isn't it? Okay, I think we have just one hand raised, Rebecca, and then perhaps we'll look to close for today. Rebecca?
Hello again, Viktor and Anni. I've got one precise question for Viktor, and I'm going to say it so that you can think about it. My comments are also about governance, and I'm just going to recap a little more on the scientific work of Michael Diamond with his work on MCRB checkpoints. But my question is, I'm afraid I didn't catch when you listed out the 4 different stages of developing governance for sunlight reflection methods, or the other acronyms which we use. You said, I think, that Operaatio Arktis is focusing on number 3 of those checkpoints, and I just like you, I don't really mind if you don't want to recap the 4 checkpoints, sorry, the 4 stages in developing governance, but I'd like you to repeat number 3, and then I'd place it in context.
Thank you. So I was talking about tipping point governance as a part of Finnish national climate strategy at that point. And there, the 4 different categories would be detecting tipping points, then forecasting them / monitoring them. The 3rd would be prevention, and the 4th would be preparing for the world after we have exceeded a tipping point.
So that would be like adaptation, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm very, very glad that I asked, because what you've just said there overlaps with a research program in ARIA, the UK Advanced Research and Invention Agency. They have a whole stream on forecasting tipping points, and Professor Gadian is engaging in that one, along with Ree Brighton. We're working with him. I mean, we're supporting him, of course. The thing that I wanted to mention was really just to place in context the Michael Diamond work and what he says there in his paper about the actual solution, which is one of the solutions could be marine cloud rebrightening. And he talks about self-governance by the researchers and doing everything that Robbie just said then, which is going very gradually, starting small, making sure that the communities understand the what and the why and the how of monitoring, how of what might the side effects be, all that kind of thing. And so it's really a partnership between physical scientists and social scientists, helping communities to make decisions locally and then regionally and that kind of thing. So, but I'm really glad that you explained again that your strategy, or that your points are part of the Finnish national strategy, because I sort of heard 4 points and I didn't get that they were to do with tipping points per se. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for your work. And I'm not sure these are our ideas. It's an emerging field in academia, quite new one, but yeah.
Very good, very good. Well, as we come to a close here, this has been a really, really stimulating discussion, and I'd just like to raise one question from my perspective for you both to maybe comment on. You know, in HPAC, we've discussed the possibility of a global youth movement to raise the momentum for this new climate plan, this new paradigm, as Anni has stated it. Do you have any comments from your perspective and your contacts about the likelihood that it would be possible to, over time, create and to mobilize youth organizations around the world to come together to actually create a lot more noise about going forward in this way? Would either of you like to comment on that? A youth movement, organizations come together For example, I just had coffee with just the former president who's just left her presidency of the International Forestry Students Association, a 12,000 member organization all over the world, including Finland. And we were talking about this idea. And there are many other, of course, youth organizations of that nature that we might, if we think about it, perhaps bring together into an association or a network that could coordinate their efforts. Have you been thinking at all about that context?
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question, and that's definitely what we've been attempting to do. Unfortunately, right now the scene of climate intervention is very small, and I think we have successfully found I don't know, 3 organizations that do things even remotely similar to what we do. What we have speculated about at some point has been, because right now we're pretty much focusing on doing affecting this, big change here in Finland using the networks that we have here. Maybe we could, if we are able to put forward this strategic shift, I guess, in Finnish climate strategies and do that effectively in coordination with, the Sami people, for example, maybe we could kind of help other first Nordic countries and maybe European, I don't know, all over the world to help other young people to create, movements like we like we did in Finland. Yeah, that would be very, very cool if we succeed here and then we have actually something to teach these people.
Yeah, Anni, do you know what the Nuorten ilmastohuippari is in English?
Oh yeah, we have an annual kind of summit, like a very big youth climate summit that we have been this is the 3rd year, I think, when we're part of organizing that. And what we managed to do at the last summit was that it's like a very official, very high profile summit, and they always come up with this kind of written, I think, I don't know what that's called, but like
policy recommendation
of policy recommendation, and we did get support of climate intervention research in there last year, so we're very much hoping to build on that.
Yeah, it's connected to the COP process, so it was given to our prime minister as well.
Yeah.
Can you guys, do you have a link to that, Viktor?
I'm not sure if it was translated into English or not, but I can look into it for sure. Yeah.
Okay, very good. And I think this is an area where we can continue to stay in touch as we expand our engagement with youth organizations like the International Forestry Students Association and others, that we could bring them into the conversation with you, and seeing perhaps, kind of a network or association of organizations that have an interest in mobilizing around this topic of a new climate plan. Well, great. Were there any final points that anyone wanted to make before we close today?
I just had one quick one, Dennis, and that is, Anni, you mentioned the Sami, and I know they've reacted fairly strongly, some of them, to geoengineering proposals. Are you seeing a more complex set of perspectives now emerging, and how are you able to make some progress with the Sami peoples or individuals?
Yeah, thank you. Definitely we are seeing change in that regard, largely because we have been able to build this relationship, quite a close working relationship with Pirita Näkkäläjärvi, who's the president of the Sami Council in Finland. And what we're doing with her currently is that she has asked us to do like a package of knowledge about tipping points and how they affect livelihoods in the Arctic, so that she can spread it around not only in the Finnish Sami parliament, but in other parts of Samiland as well. And she's working to build this coalition of indigenous peoples in the Arctic, who will, speak for the increase of research on climate interventions, which is very, very exciting. Yeah, so very good question.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Anni.
So I just got one last.
John.
Could I just make one last point?
Sure.
Kind of overview point. Most of the world is worried about the amount of greenhouse gases which affect the thermal radiation going out of the planet, and so when we focus here on the albedo, the reflectivity of the planet, and the two things are quite separate. So when you're arguing with people, you can say, well, we accept your argument that we need emissions reduction to deal with the outgoing radiation and the thermal, removing this blanket of CO2 that we put up. We agree with you. That's fine, but the research community hasn't addressed this business of reflectivity, and it needs to be, because the Earth's energy imbalance is a combination of those two factors, and the reflectivity problem is growing much faster than the CO2 and greenhouse gas problem, and that is a way of changing the conversation and not getting the kind of you've got to get the people's sympathy, and I think you can get people's sympathy that way. That's my feeling. Yeah,
that is excellent point, John. And I think that we always need to keep reminding ourselves of that reflectivity of the Earth is a much bigger issue than simply removing the greenhouse gas barrier. And I think that's good for Anni and Viktor to consider in their communications. Well, it's been a great discussion. I just am thrilled to have had the chance to have these two young and so talented and passionate and effective communicators and mobilizers with us today. And I do hope that we can continue to associate together our organizations. We need the youth of the world to join the more senior people, the scientists and influencers, and they bring such complementary skills and abilities to the problems that we face in terms of building this momentum behind a new climate plan. So once again, I thank you again. A reminder that our meetings are bi-weekly, and we would welcome your joining us in our coming meetings as we go forward.